Hello, this is Benjamin Boyce, and welcome to my speaking adventure. Today's discussion, or monologue, as the case may be, is about a brief Twitter discussion that I had on Twitter with a man who was, it seems to me, defending the cancellation, the literal cancellation of a particular British comedy show that has been scrubbed from Netflix and the BBC's streaming service. The reason why I engaged with him is because he wrote that satire is about disrupting power structures by pointing out the ridiculousness of them. I replied, is disrupting power structures what defines satire, or what makes it legitimate? Now, if it's the former, that satire is defined by the disruption of a power structure, that's news to me. I thought satire could be angled at anything that you want to satirize. But on the other hand, if disrupting power structures is inherent to satire, then we're no longer talking about satire as a morally neutral term. Satire, according to this gentleman, is a morally laden construct, which is kind of what I want to tease apart. And actually, the teasing itself is what's at stake here. If teasing itself is only legitimate insofar as it is dismantling a power structure, and illegitimate if it is not dismantling a power structure, then we need a term for proper teasing or improper teasing, valid satire and invalid satire. Furthermore, who gets to decide which satire is valid and invalid, and am I able to satirize the person who is claiming control over that word, who is imposing a power structure of morality upon satire? I pressed him on that, and his answer was that punch up, punch down is his moral compass with regards to what is valid and invalid. That made me think about a satirist trying to perform upon a pitched C, where the definition of up and down is constantly changing. How can you define what is proper and improper if that which is up and down, or that which is higher and lower, is constantly trading places? Furthermore, if one has the higher moral ground, one would suppose that you're not supposed to satirize the higher moral ground, unless there's a power structure inherent in that. The problem with angling everything against power structures is that you yourself are trying to impose a power structure, just as aiming to disrupt a status quo, in effect, is another status quo. If the dismantling of power structures in and of itself is the ascendant power structure, then that in and of itself is what requires one to show its ridiculousness. So I pressed him again, and he came back to me with saying that he watched my latest video about how I, quote, equating actual blackface to white people empathizing with and supporting black people and calling it emotional blackface. So I don't think there's a lot of a point in engaging with me. So I don't know if he actually engaged with the proposition that I was making in that video with regards to the caricature. When you make a caricature of an individual, even if it's a righteous caricature, you're still demeaning them. You're dehumanizing them. You're separating them from your own complex humanity by putting them on a pedestal, or by putting them beneath you, or standing on top of them with your boot or whatever. This individual, it seems to me, and I may be wrong, is seeing the world in a moral way, where every statement or every fact or every facet of life has a moral weight to it, has a moral value. And through that moral value, we know if something is valid or invalid. That morality, having to do with justice, I suppose, or progressivism writ large, is questionable and therefore mockable from my estimation, insofar as it becomes rigid. Insofar as he said that you even made this statement that empathizing with black people is a form of blackface, means that you are no longer acting in good faith. Perhaps I'm not acting in good faith, but on the other hand, perhaps I'm allowing myself to play around with ideas, and that playing around with ideas allows me a certain freedom that people who are acting according to a moral pathway or some sort of moral guidance in every one of their actions does not have. Now, maybe it's best to not be free to question things. Maybe it's best to not satirize that which is sacred, because in chaining yourself to that which is sacred, some moral good, you can actually accomplish good in the world. And perhaps those who would mock you in your path should be discarded, and should be derided and should be satirized or pushed off or whatever you need to do to demean them because their input is not necessary for your outcome. The problem with entering into a moral panic is that everything is collapsed on a good-bad spectrum. An artist cannot thrive, let alone do much of anything within such an environment. An artist makes guesses. An artist ventures into the unknown, into the uncertain. The activist, the moralist, proclaims a certainty and stamps that certainty on everything they come across. Therefore, satirism to them is only valid if it's working in their direction. The artist, the artistic pursuit, is to play around with material to create something that has an effect. Now, that effect can be beauty or ugly. It can be good or bad. It can lead people to institute values within their life or to pursue a certain outcome. And insofar as my quest is the revelation of a common humanity, I think I am very progressive. I think that my goal is similar to the stated goal of a lot of progressive activists, a lot of people who are acting in good faith to bring about better knowledge of the ways in which different groups within our society are mistreated or who are less treated or treated as lesser. That is a very worthy goal. That is a very righteous goal. But every time you have a righteous goal that begins to sweep aside different opinions, that begins to clamp down on acceptable and unacceptable forms of art, that goal becomes brittle, becomes fragile, becomes more and more stern in its execution, and furthermore, more and more blind to possible missteps along the way. Insofar as I satirize the woke, it is not to satirize common humanity. It is not to diminish the pursuit of justice writ large, but it is actually to awake us up in our being woke. It is actually to combat an enwokening that would have you only see the world in one way, which would be, in my opinion, analogous to a dream, a very rigid dream, a very simplistic dream. And the questioning and the breaking free of that will cause me to make mistakes, will cause me to say things that will come back to bite me on the butt. That is a risk I am willing to venture. I am willing to venture being perceived as in bad faith in order to have a broader good faith procedure of manipulating ideas, of performing flexibility of thought, because that flexibility of thought will allow me to dance upon the rough seas. It will allow me to navigate the chaos. And furthermore, I think that performing this as somebody in front of a camera allows people exposure to a way of dealing with issues that is not, I am right, this is what we need to do. That being said, I don't really understand outcome-oriented behavior other than I'm going to build a product. I'm going to try to build a product that attracts people's attention, that maintains people's attention, and that modulates people's attention so that at the end of it, their attention, their frequency of attention is in a different place. To bring about a change of state, that is the act of an artist. A change of state, not necessarily of the state though. And am I responsible for changing the state? Am I responsible for urging people to have a better grasp on what it is to be a human being? I think that I can do more work. I think I can do more work. I'm willing to admit I can be better and do better. I'm not going to acquiesce to people who think they know what's good and right, especially if they cannot prove to me that they're slipping in morality to suit their own ends and blocking themselves off from the nature of being human, which in and of itself, I think, is really rooted in living in uncertainty and carving out compromises with certainty that don't chain you in such a way that you can only sink down at the very end. And if you sink too far, I cannot make fun of you. And if I get too high, who can I make fun of? I guess what's left of me if I get so high and mighty? There's no more making fun of anything then, which is a dreadful existence. Seems to me to be the opposite of heaven. I will talk to you all later.